Welcome, everybody. What a great song, Wake Up, right? What a good theme to be carrying through this event. Wake up to ourselves, to each other, to the world. Thank you for joining us today. It's incredible to finally be here, as we've been planning this gathering for some time now. A gathering to do some intergenerational learning, a gathering to hear from our elders and to acknowledge the work of those who came before us, of those whose shoulders we stand on. Thank you for joining us today for this particular session. Please note that this session is being recorded, and we're pleased to be providing ASL services. Thank you, Cheryl and Nicole, for interpreting. I am Andrea Capane-Sanderson, CEO of Bird Bar Place, formerly CAMP, and co-founder of the BIPOC Coalition of Washington State. Many of you know that we were created in 2020 in the wake of COVID-19's health and economic impacts on our communities, as well as the brutality against Black bodies by law enforcement, as we saw with the killing of George Floyd, and carried through during those moments when anti-Asian hate continued to be on the rise. Myself, along with fellow co-founders Ananda, Victoria, and Jody, who you'll hear from in a moment, created this space to ensure that Black and brown bodies who were experiencing invisibility in those moments had a space to be seen, to be heard and witnessed. We also knew that we needed to establish solidarity, to build a unified agenda, and to take really bold action to reframe what racial and social justice looks like in our state and in our communities. Hence, the BIPOC Coalition of Washington State was born. But before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the land we're on. So may I have a moment of silence, please? We acknowledge and recognize our Native people of this land, both past and present, those who were the original stewards of this land before colonization. And we give our respect for the enduring relationship between all Indigenous people and their traditional territories, for the practices and spiritualities that are tied to this land on which we work and live. We acknowledge their suffering, the land theft and genocide, and we honor with gratitude this land itself and the people who it ultimately belongs to. We also recognize and acknowledge the labor with which this country was built on the labor of enslaved people who were kidnapped and brought to the US from the continent of Africa. And we recognize the continuous contribution of our ancestors and survivors. We also acknowledge all immigrant labor, including voluntary, involuntary, trafficked, forced, and undocumented people who contributed to the building of this country and continue to serve within our labor force. We acknowledge all unpaid caregiving labor. We also acknowledge the trauma both experienced and witnessed of all Black, Indigenous, Latinx, Asian, Pacific Islanders, other people of color, and our enduring spirit, as well as our resilience. Thank you. Before I hand it over to Jody to ground us, I'd like to formally introduce the founders leading this work with me. Victoria Santos. Victoria is co-founder of the BIPOC Coalition and now co-executive director of the coalition. Jody Nishioka is executive director of Communities Rise and fellow co-founder of the BIPOC Coalition. And Ananda Valenzuela, co-executive director of the BIPOC Coalition and fellow co-founder. When the four of us came together to create the coalition, we understood that it was for very distinct reasons. Reasons we heard from our network from across the state, to develop an equal partnership with funders, to change the power dynamic, to balance that power, to ensure that greater resources gets to our organizations, that our organizations are better fortified to do the work it needs to do in community. Ultimately, what we heard is that we had had enough of being under-resourced, and we needed space to rest and reset, to take care of ourselves and to strategize. This is what our coalition was born out of. And with that, I hand it over to Jody to help ground us.
All right, I think I'm muted. It says I'm muted. No, I'm not muted. Hi, everyone. I'm Jody. And I'm going to just do just a few seconds or a minute to ground us in this present moment together. So if you like, you can close your eyes. You don't have to, whatever feels comfortable. And just take a few deep breaths. We like to start with grounding ourselves because we come from such a busy time. We're always also busy. And to the greatest gift I think that we bring to community and to being in spaces together is really to be present with each other. So let's just all take a second, a few minutes to take a few breaths, letting go of the busyness of the day, the emails we just sent, the texts that we just received. And let's get present here in this moment. So if you can take a couple breaths with me here in this moment, inhaling and exhaling, really feeling a sense of being present in this virtual room together in community. And another inhale. Feel the earth, the floor, the earth, connect with the earth beneath your feet. Inhaling from the energy from the earth, bringing it up into your chest and releasing when you exhale your shoulders down again. And just feeling with gratitude the air that we breathe and the earth that we walk on together and the space that we've created together. One more breath together. Inhaling. Thank you for being present today with us. Before we go too long, I also want to introduce our newest member to our BIPOC ED Coalition team, Masame Spar, who is our brand new managing director, or almost brand new, been here for 27 days, and wanted to introduce you all to Masame. Masame is from New York, been born and raised there, is the last of 7 children from 2 Caribbean-born parents, and comes to us from the educational sector. She was senior director of operations of a charter school and comes with lots of enthusiasm, lots of skills, and we're just so grateful to have Mas. So Mas, you want to say a few words?
Hi everyone, I'm Masame Spar. I go by Mas Spar. I'm so happy to be a part of this organization and so happy to be here with all of you. This is just an amazing opportunity, and every day I just wake up happy and blessed that I'm here in this role and really supporting the coalition in its steps moving forward. So thank you once again, Jody, for introducing me, but I'm so happy to be here. I have no other words other than excitement. So Jody, I'm gonna pass it back to you.
Great, thanks. We're so happy to have you too. We're just gonna take a couple minutes. I'm gonna take a minute here to just introduce myself again, as I am the Executive Director of Communities Rise and a co-founder here at the BIPOC ED Coalition, and just build a little bit about why we came together without repeating what Andrew said, focusing a little bit more on the wellness side. So when we got together and brought 150 folks together in our very first meeting, that we thought maybe 30 or 50 people might show up, and 150 people showed up, and we're like, oh my gosh, we tapped into something here. The 2 things that really came up was the advocacy piece that Andrea talked about, but the second piece that came up was wellness, and this call for us to be thinking about our own wellness as BIPOC leaders, because we are asked to step up in communities that are under-resourced, but that we have to work extra hard because our communities are inequitably impacted by the inequities of our community and our spaces. Our leaders are working really hard, and they were tired. They were burnt out. This was during COVID. They had members of families that they were, during the pandemic, concerned about themselves, along with their communities really being greatly impacted by the pandemic. And we realized that, if we don't do something and recognize ourselves and the importance of wellness in this work, we aren't going to be able to sustain. We're not going to be able to sustain and continue this work, or we will, but people are going to be getting sick. Our own leaders are going to be getting sick. And so this came up really loud and clear. And so we decided, okay, we're going to work on our advocacy around resources and balancing and calling for more equitable funding and power balancing, but we're also going to focus on wellness of our own leaders. And so we have several programs that we've been doing, and I'll be talking about our most recent one, our sabbatical program. But just wanted to talk about that's very close to my heart, because if we are not taking care of ourselves and our families, we're not going to be able to continue this work. And it's such vital work in our community. So just wanted to mention that from the wellness perspective. And I want to introduce Victoria Santos, who is also a co-founder, and let her introduce herself and say a few words.
And thank you, Jody. My name is Victoria Santos. I use she, her pronouns and ella. And, you know, as Jody mentioned, this came out, the BIPOC Coalition came out of a need and a call and a response. And at that time, like all of us have been working full time at our own executive director roles. I was co-executive director of Young Women Empowered. And at the time we were based at El Centro de la Raza. And we were, you know, we just made time for this because one, we felt the deep resonance, and we also felt the deep solidarity within ourselves and our organizations. And it's in that spirit of this, of solidarity, that we put this together. And so I'm deeply honored to be here and grateful to all of you for being here, and in that spirit of solidarity, may we continue to move forward and move all of our communities forward. Thank you. I'm going to pass it on to Andrea.
Thank you, Victoria. Thank you, Jody. Thank you, Mas. We understand that this iteration of the work came out of us BIPOC leaders across the state of Washington and the country, out of holding a type of communal weight, right? The weight of our people, the weight of our elders here in this room who you'll hear from, and the weight of our ancestors. And as we set out on this journey, we took really thoughtful and compassionate action on behalf of our communities based on that weight. And it is with this understanding that we step into this work with each of you, the understanding of inner wisdom and operating from a place of liberation, to be able to do this work in a sustained way, and to give to what racial and social justice work needs to be able to bring about successful change. So today we continue that change work. And with that, I pass it to our incredible facilitator for the gathering, Candace Jackson. Candace, take it away.
Hi, y'all. I cannot tell you how honored, how blessed, how excited I am to have this conversation with you all today. I am pleased to introduce members of the Minority Executive Directors Coalition of King County, which, if you didn't know, which you probably did if you came to this event, but if you didn't know, the MEDC is a coalition of community leaders of color who work together to ensure equity, equality, and social justice in partnership with communities of color and for people of color. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Cheryl to just do a brief introduction.
Thank you, Candace. My name is Cheryl Cobbs Murphy. I spent the last 27 years of my work life as the last 11 years actually as the executive director of Solid Ground, which is a large nonprofit social service agency in Seattle. I was actually at the organization for 27 years. I got involved with MEDC in around 2011 when I became executive director at Solid Ground, and actually was with MEDC one form or another through its when it ended about 11 years later. I actually was the board chair at MEDC for the last 6 months of its existence. The only other thing I really want to say is how excited I am that that the BIPOC ED Coalition has actually been established. When I hear about the work that you're doing and the goals that you've established as an organization, it mirrors a lot of the work that MEDC did. And there's really been a big gap in that work for the last few years. So the fact that you all are doing that work now is really exciting to me. And I thank you for picking that up and taking the work forward.
Thank you, Cheryl. And I would like to introduce Estela Ortega. Estela, if you would say a few words, introduce yourself.
Thank you so much. It is an incredible honor to be here with everyone, seeing your faces again, and of course, I would love to see who's in the audience. So I'm Estela Ortega, the Executive Director of El Centro de la Raza. We are celebrating our 50th year. And when we started back in 1972, there's no way that we even imagined, that we would be here today. And I guess one of the points that I want to make before wrapping up my comments is that El Centro de la Raza has a strong commitment to multiracial unity. And there is a concrete reason for that, is that when we occupied the old Beacon Hill School in 1972, Chicano, Mexicano, Latinos in King County, there was only about 25,000 of us in the region with literally no political clout. And the clout that we had in terms of the building being turned over to us was from our respective communities in the African American community, Native American, and the Asian community. That is why the building was turned over to us. And so we have always felt that we have a debt that we will never be able to pay back. And that is our commitment to multiracial unity. So it's great to be here with you all.
Beautiful, Estela, thank you for those words. And now I'd like to bring forward Josephine. Josephine, if you'd say a few words.
Thank you, Candace. Josephine Tamayo Murray, she, her pronouns. And I'm Executive Director of the Communities of Concern Commission, which is a 23-member statewide coalition of community-based organizations within communities of color and poor rural communities, seeking public investment to build capital assets in our respective communities to reduce poverty. I joined MEDC when I became the King County Agency Director for Catholic Community Services in the early 1990s. And after that, and working with Cheryl, when we tried to, if you will, bring MEDC back, I became Director of Public Policy for Catholic Community Services, and I'm currently now on my glide path, being Executive Director of the Communities of Concern Commission. It's an honor to be here to share with you what has happened with our multicultural efforts and what strengths were founded on this for you.
Thank you so much, Josephine. We're excited to get into it. Next up, I'd like to introduce Larry Gossett.
Thank you very much. This is the introductory phase. Am I right, Ms. Jackson? All right. I'm Larry Gossett. I'm a homeboy. By that, I mean I was born in Seattle, and I'm very proud of that. And I've had the opportunity to go through the Seattle public school system and later to the University of Washington. And the first experience I had in serving the community was joining VISTA in 1966. I became a VISTA volunteer, and only the second year that VISTA existed. And I joined not because I was awoke or anything. I just had consciousness about serving the poor. I saw it and was told that it would be a way of securing a deferment from military service. I did not want to go to jail. I did not want to go and move at that time to Canada as ways of enjoying, but I was not going to go in the military and fight my brothers and sisters in Vietnam who already, it was clear to me, had been suffering from colonialism from the French and now the Americans for 100 years. So I joined Vista, went to Central Harlem, became a Vista volunteer. And at the same time I got there, I don't know if it was faith or the great spirit up above, but Stokely Carmichael came out with a new phase that went through the community of Harlem faster than it went through any other community in the country. And I was there working for Harlem Youth Incorporated when he said Black Power. So I joined the Black Power movement in 1966 and got very radicalized, became a Black revolutionary, committed to Black Power. Some kind of spirit came upon me, said, this is your life work, bro. You're gonna be serving the people, no matter what else you might end up doing. And I accepted that along with a lot of other young Black people in Harlem. But I always planned to come back, came back to Seattle and went back to the University of Washington where I graduated in 1970. But while there, I was a founder of the University of Washington Black Student Union. I was instrumental in helping to found the Black Panther Party, in that the Black Panther Party was organized because we took 23 youth to a Black youth conference at San Francisco State. And the keynote speaker was the most profoundly dynamic, charismatic Black speaker any of us had ever heard. And that was Bobby Seale of the Black Panther Party. And he invited us to the funeral of the first person that ever died as a Black Panther, little Bobby Hutton, on April 10th, 1968. We went there, and under the leadership of Aaron and Elmer Dixon, Bobby Seale, he could feel that he had no choice but to make a commitment that he would come to Seattle, Washington, and organize the first chapter of the Black Panther Party outside the state of California. We organized it during his visit on April 18th, 1968. I went, when I graduated in 1970, I got my first job in the Office of Minority Affairs. I was hired as a supervisor of the Black Student Division, had responsibility for recruiting Black students to the University of Washington. The only reason I had that job is because Black students at the university organized the Black Student Union and said that, and we said that we're going to use any means necessary to get this university, which we saw as institutionally racist, to be more accountable to Black and other third world students and poor whites, because most of us had most of us had class consciousness. So we got the president of the university as a result of our sit-in on May 20th. We had wanted it to be on May 19th, Malcolm X's birthday, but somebody had the sense to look at the calendar and found out that that day was on a Sunday. So we took over the president's office May 20th, 1968. We were able to get him to say, yes, I will commit to your demands, which was to establish a recruiting program. It was first called SAP, then it became EOP, and that we would include more Blacks, Latinos, Asians, Native Americans, and poor whites. And the establishment of Black studies that later became ethnic studies, the recruitment of more Black faculty and staff. On the University of Washington, when we had our sit-in, there was only 53 Black students out of 35,000. All of y'all can see that that's pitiful, to say the least, for a university that at that time was 107 years old. And then lastly, we got the university commit to setting up educational and cultural programs that would be run by people of color. And now today, you guys see that there's an ethnic cultural center named after our first Assistant Vice President for Minority Affairs, Dr. Samuel Kelly, and across the street, the Ethnic Cultural Theater. After I left the Office of Minority Affairs, I started working for CAMP as the director of the youth programs at CAMP, the Center Area Motivation Program, the organization that Andrea is currently over now, and it's called Bird Bar Community Service Center. But I was at CAMP from 1979 to 1983. And I think that the various programs that we organized there had a lot to do with, of course, the other organization working to reduce Black poverty in Seattle from about 50% down to 23% of the Black people that live in the Central Area poor. When I left in 1993, by that time I'd become very interested in electoral politics. I became a King County council member that lasted to 2019. And now I don't like to use retired, I'm an elder statesman that until I go to the happy hunting grounds, I'll be trying to do what I can do to serve the people. Thank you for the time to introduce myself.
That was magnificent. Thank you so much, Larry. And that history means so much. So we appreciate you sharing it. And with that, I'd also like to introduce Richard Dickey. If you would say a few words. Oh, you're on mute though. There you go.
Hi, my name is Richard Marr. I have the distinction of being the first paid staff person to MEDC from about 1990 to 1997. This was supposed to be a part-time job, but it turned out to be a little bit more. When I applied for the position, I was previously working with young people in Southeast Seattle. In fact, prior to that, my entire career was around working with young people as a youth counselor in juvenile justice and in education. I was kind of put into a position where I needed to find something more part-time because I had a couple of kids, about 1 and 4, and my wife just started a new position that would require a lot more of her time. So this part-time position was really ideal for me because it matched some of the values and activities that I've been involved in. Those other positions pretty much, for the most part, paid for my involvement in the South Chinatown International District, where I've been a longtime activist and still very much involved in that community. I left the job primarily because I thought I had exhausted my skills. Meaning I did not think I could carry the organization any further with what limited skills that I had, because there was some interest in forming a statewide organization. In fact, the last year I was there, we spent a significant amount of time trying to organize other directors from around the state. And unfortunately, that did not get a lot of traction. And I had already given my notice, so I had to move on. And following those years with MEDC, I ended up working for a small family foundation where, in large part, I kind of carried on some of the work that I was doing at MEDC, working with communities of color, trying to advocate for more resources in those communities. And now I'm happily retired. I only use that term because even though I'm retired, I'm still very active in a lot of activities in the ID.
Thank you, Richard. Really appreciate that. And last but certainly not least, Theresa, if you would please introduce yourself, say a few words.
Hi, I'm Theresa Fujiwara, she, her pronouns. Sort of my history would be way too long to tell, but my involvement with MEDC really started through at least the sort of driving values and principles. I'm Governor Murray. refer back to my relationship with Bob Santos. I had the privilege of working for him from when I got out of high school until I got out of graduate school. And so had firsthand learning about the value of organizing and doing cross-racial, cross-cultural work. But really what solidified it for me was my work with Asian Counseling and Referral Service, where I was part of the startup and development of a multi-service organization focused on addressing the needs in the Asian and Pacific Island communities. And during my tenure at ACRS, I got much more involved with MEDC from probably about 1985 to when I left ACRS in 1993. I served as president of MEDC from 88 to 90 and take some credit for bringing Richard Marr into the organization to have the capacity to really build off the strengths of the membership that was growing at that time. But I left in 93, so I have limited information about sort of the growth and development and really the sunset of MEDC from the years after that. But it was during those years that another great leader was Joanne Kaufman, who I collaborated with in promoting mental health reform that started to address the needs for cultural competency in communities of color. We were able to elevate the importance of the voice of communities of color, which we now call BIPOC communities, with institutional funders like public funders and grant makers. And I think for the first time created an entity that people started to look to for as a resource to inform how they move their policies and practices forward. Currently, I am co-chair, along with your chair, Andrea, of an emerging alliance of BIPOC leaders. And so I'm really excited to see the group that's gathered here today and very hopeful that we will collaborate and join forces in our shared interest in creating a stronger, more powerful influence on the mainstream systems that need to become more responsive and to the needs in our communities. So I'll leave it at that.
Y'all said all the things today. My heart is so full. And just gives us a sense of the incredible amount of work over decades that has gone into where we stand today, where we start this work, how we think about moving forward in this work, and how we carry those lessons forward to even the next generations. So there is a really beautiful commemorative video about MEDC that we would like you all to be able to watch. It gives a little bit of the history, but also shows some of its evolution. So we'll take a look at that video, we'll watch it together, and then we will open it up for discussion amongst you all in the room and share a little bit about what came up for you as you're watching the video. So with that, I'll pass it to Stephanie. Thank you.
I'm Governor Gary Locke, and congratulations to the Minority Executive Directors Coalition of King County on 20 years of advancing racial, political, social, and economic justice for people of color. You have united leaders from the Native American, Chicano, Latino, African American, and Asian American communities to make life better for the disadvantaged. And you've worked together to educate and empower our diverse communities to make justice for all a reality. Since 1981, you have successfully nurtured and sustained cooperation and unity among your members, persons of color working in private, nonprofit health, human services, and community economic development agencies. Every year, you assist tens of thousands of King County residents in meeting their basic human needs. You promote self-sufficiency, You provide resources and ensure equity in the distribution of those resources. You educate people on the issues of racism and culturally sensitive health and human services. And you advocate for public policies that enhance equity in life. You provide a place for people of color to come together, to share victories, challenges, and opportunities, all in a culturally sensitive, relevant, trusting, and loving environment. So thank you, MEDC, for all you do. Happy 20th anniversary, and keep up the great work.
Give me one word that, in your mind, represents the Minority Executive Directors Coalition.
Power.
I'd say umoja, which means unity in Swahili.
Compassion.
Love.
Trust.
Change.
Successful.
The coalition is kind of the glue that binds us all together and brings us all together to work for the common good on behalf of communities of color, but also to just support one another in the midst of all of the chaos and the racial divide and funding.
Bob Santos, Larry Gossett, Bernie Whitebear, Roberto Maestas, in our history statement, kind of formed the concept of being able to work together on a basketball court. They used to play basketball together. Prior to that, they had intermingled with each other, with their organizations, on many civil rights issues that were of that period.
I think every organization needs a catalyst, and them coming together and essentially representing the 4 major ethnic groups have demonstrated the kind of working relationship that was possible. And I don't think without their leadership, their commitment, their tenacity, and sometimes their arrogance, that we would exist today.
Well, we've definitely caused an embarrassment to this military reservation.
Definitely the Fort Lawton takeover. I believe all of them were involved in one form or the other.
Some black students and members of the Black Panther Party, we all went out to Fort Lawton, jumped over the fence, and our Native American brothers and sisters were very tickled that we jumped over the fence, but all of us had slacks and starched shirts on, coming straight from the ghetto, and they said, "Why are you guys dressed like that?" And they said, "Well, whatever we're doing, we got to be cool," and they just laughed, and it really formed a solidarity amongst us then that has lasted throughout all these decades.
Taking of Beacon Hill Elementary School, which is now El Centro de la Raza. The strategies were formulated at a facility that Bob was operating. They were able to forge, I think, the relationship that allows for the coalition to begin its first baby steps, and then formally, when the initial meeting was called in '81 by Ike Ikeda, to kind of formalize that relationship into a coalition.
When Ronald Reagan took office in 1981, the very first thing he did, Enrique, was to eliminate, not reduce, but to eliminate the federal anti-poverty program. And this was the agency that had provided most of the funding for the Central Motivation Program. And by 1980-81, I was its executive director, had provided half of the funding for El Centro and quite a bit for United Indians, as well as Interim, International District Improvement Association. So we said, what are we going to do?
We brought together 12 minority executive directors and discussed this issue of the impact of the new president. And we all agreed, it looks like social services will be cut back drastically. So the challenge was whether we do business as usual, which meant cutthroating each other to get the most dollars for our own agency, or try to work together.
We felt it was then time to put our separate agendas aside and do the very best we could working together and see if we could in fact build a common agenda.
I think everybody was exhilarated by it because it was just the next step of what we saw as a maturing process that needed to happen.
And the group unanimously agreed, let's try that. That's our only possible way to address this problem.
It did work. Local government was forced to get more resources into this pot, into this community, so that everyone had a fair shot of delivering the programs that they needed funding for.
At the state level, we had quarterly meetings with the Secretary of DSHS and giving the Secretary a progress report, how well their programs are doing. And places where they weren't, we recommended action and we were able to get it.
I think that it's influential in the sense of how contracts and policies and programs are developed. MEDC is often seen as a body to consult with at the beginning, in the middle, and at the end of those opportunities.
It just makes all the sense in the world for Washington Mutual or any one of the other companies in this region to step forward and support this organization. I think we all recognize from a business perspective that we want our communities to be healthy. We want them to be good places to live, work, and play. And a lot of the work that MEDC and its members do contribute to achieving that goal.
And so I think on a formal level, that's part of its work, to educate, to advocate, and sometimes to instigate when change is necessary. I think most organizations have to go through a transitional leadership period. And one of the things that MEDC, even though its intentions was to always create leadership opportunities for all members, was still a very much male-driven organization that was typical of America and still is very typical. However, we struggled during a period when the men were busy running their organizations for whatever reason, and leadership needed to come from the women. And in that sense, Joanne Kaufman, who was our first female president, came forward and said, I will provide this transitional need. At that same time, then Theresa Fujiwara was on her heels, I came on her heels, and it was perhaps during a very developmental phase of the organization. So in some sense, I see the transition from the forefathers to the mothers.
It wasn't difficult. We had already committed that we needed to be a unified community, and the women that began to push for more diversity and leadership roles had in their own right done some impressive stuff. So it was a no-brainer, really, even though some of us might have had a little bit of a, well, wait a minute, what's this?
And I think the leadership that the women provide in that time was dual. It was around infrastructure, but also formalizing and clarifying in some way the ideology of the organization.
It wasn't traumatic for the organization, but we had to make good adjustments. We had to change our attitudes and grow.
It's always great. It's always great to be part of a movement that has made change. We're talking about impacting tens of thousands of people's lives, changing the objective conditions socially, economically, politically, educationally for the health services.
You know, for as bright as the past 2 decades have been, and it has been very, very bright, I do think that the future is virtually unlimited. I think that the next 20 years may show the first 20 years to be really the organization in its infancy. I think it has virtually unlimited potential.
MEDC made me be an internationalist and to be concerned with all people of color and their struggles, and to see the similarities as well as the experiences and the opportunities to make a difference. So I am blessed really to have been able to have been a part of it.
Today is even more needed. The challenge in this community, like many other communities across the United States, when it comes to dealing with minorities, there is a problem. And that's one of the major challenge for America as a democracy to address. And we are developing that kind of a model.
I'll go to my grave feeling that this is one of the greater successes of my community life here in Seattle.
There's a bond there that we know that we're one. Beautiful.
I was blessed to have been taught by and mentored by the founders, some of the founders of MEDC, including Larry Gossett, Bernie Whitebear, Roberto Maestas, Bob Santos, Joe Garcia, Ike Aikita. All of them informed how I was going to pursue my work in human services, seeking social justice, community work. So I think we have a responsibility to at least give our young people options and opportunities, and MEDC certainly can do that.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Stephanie. Oh, that was a lot of really beautiful history. And I'm wondering how it's landing with you all across the state. What's coming up for you? You can feel free to drop something in the chat. You can go ahead and take yourself off mute and talk if you'd like. But let's spend some time just processing. How was that? Yeah, that was beautiful. Thank you, Judy. The history was quite amazing to see put in that 13 to 15-minute chunk. Yes.
I just got to say, it gave me such a sense of nostalgia for the fight. I'm a product of my dad working with Larry Gossett, and I remember him even being a preacher, but my dad saying, you know, we got to go shut down the bridge, going to Bellevue Community College and doing all that stuff. And I was little growing up hearing that. And so part of me is like, I kind of, you know, I'm still in social service too, but I miss that fight that we all did together. And it was like, it brought it back that I kind of missed that. But the elders are just phenomenon. I mean, where we are in Seattle today is a testament to that work.
That's right. We stand on the shoulders of giants for sure. Beautiful. How was that, MEDC members? How was it to see that video? Okay, we got the applause. It was good.
Yeah.
It brought back some memories.
Yes, ma'am.
It was inspiring to hear our own story.
Right? Y'all did some amazing things. And yes, Val, that was Kikora. That absolutely was her. Actually, that's who we got the video from.
Oh, from Kikora Dorsey.
We did,
Oh, great,
yes.
great,
Yep.
great. I'm glad she had that. Now I'm gonna want a copy.
You can have it. It's ready for you.
Was there actually a video? I just saw
yeah.
faces. I just heard the narrative and I recognized all the voices, but I didn't get to see a thing.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm sorry you didn't get to see it. We will make sure you get the link though, Richard.
Great, thank you.
Yep, you can have it. Beautiful. Right. Any other reflections from folks?
Yeah, I think, you know, in the moment when we were doing the work, I don't think we really recognized the impact that we were having and the long-term impact that MEDC really had. And so for me, looking back and seeing all of that was really great. It was an opportunity to sort of celebrate all that work and remember how impactful it really was.
Yeah.
I guess what I would add is that as Roberto said, it did make us feel like one. We felt strong. I mean, I remember hearing interviews and, talks where Bob would say, that he could call the Mexicans and there'd be like 100 people, at one time. And I think that part of it wasn't just the fact that we were organizing around, trying to create services for our communities to ease the pain and suffering, to have people lead dignified lives. But it also was that fight for justice. I mean, what I was thinking about was, South Africa, when we came together somewhere in Madison Park and, we're all there together demanding that the consul at that time either leave or take a position. I can't remember that, or just the different issues that we worked on around justice, trying to stop the war in Central America. Those were big ideas that really resonated with people, that we could see what was happening nationally, internationally, had an impact on us locally. So I think that those are things also that were really inspirational to people.
Right on.
I see Elena's comment. I didn't realize this was an outcome of Seattle's radical history, and these occupations totally makes sense. Nice to understand how these are connected. MEDC forming to be a source of support. Yeah. Those threads, right? Like we don't always understand. And this is the importance of being able to bring these elders, these living ancestors here in the space. We don't often have this opportunity, and it's so, so rich. Wonderful. Well, let's dive into some questions.
All right.
So, thinking about the historical context that MEDC existed in, so the video kind of did a early days, the beginning, moving through the timeline, and recognizing that there's so much going on in the social and political environment right now. And also that, sometimes things just don't change. There are similarities to what was going on when MEDC was around and active, to what's going on today. And then there's also differences. So thinking about the lessons that our elders are bringing us forward today, how do we think about the historical context? Larry, do you want to kick us off with sharing a little bit about the social and political context?
Yes, and I want to begin by thanking you all for that excellent video, because I believe that after I make my initial comments, that many of you will relate it real quickly to the video. And then later on, when you go back to your respective communities, we can build on that understanding. I'd like to begin by thanking the BIPOC ED Coalition for sponsoring this very important webinar discussion on how to build solidarity. I was very happy that you put the building of solidarity as part of your core values first, laying the foundation for the work that you're going to continue. And in talking about continuation, MEDC was started in 1981 when Ronald Reagan, unfortunately in 80, got elected president and took office in 81. And like the video said, the first thing he did was end the Federal Anti-Poverty Agency. It had been called OEO, Office of Economic Opportunity, but by 81, the name had been changed to the Community Services Administration. But to lay out to you why we were so quickly able to organize the Minority Executive Directors Coalition and began meeting at El Centro, we had already been working together since the late 60s. The foundation of the four of us that initiated MEDC began, and from my perspective, at Franklin High School in 1968, because Roberto Maestas, as you all heard, was a Spanish speaker, Spanish teacher at Franklin High School in Seattle from about 1966 to 68. And in 68, he heard a big commotion coming from outside, and 125 of the 175 Black students were marching on Franklin High School, and all the students and other staff left because they were fearful. They didn't know what it was all about. But what it was all about is that the two leaders of the Black Student Union had been kicked out for fighting. They were boys, Charles Flavors and Charles Oliver, and two girls, Nan Williamson and Joyce Driggers. They were in the process of kicking them out to school. The principal had already written a note saying, your daughter can no longer come to Franklin High School until she looks ladylike. What's that all about? Look ladylike. Y'all want her to, these girls to go back into the back bedroom or bathroom and have to straighten their hair, trying to adopt the beauty standards of being a beautiful woman in America and not accept their natural beauty. That was crazy, but they were going to kick them out of school for that. So that led to the sit-in. Roberto stayed. He was the only teacher that stayed. And I thought I didn't have a lot of, third world consciousness. So I said, why did that white boy stay here? And they said, man, that's not a white man. That's a Latino, Mexican. And he's our Spanish teacher, and he's cool, So they took me up to introduce me to Roberto, and that's how I met Roberto Maestas. But that sit-in had a profound impact on him. We met Bernie Whitebear because we got called in '69 to go support the Indian fishing rights at Frank's Landing. And Bernie was there, and Sid Mills was there, and some of the founders of the American Indian movement was there. And they explained to us that, they'd had rights in the state to fish since 1854, and they wanted to continue to put pressure on the government to adhere to those treaty rights of being able to fish for as long as the rivers flow. But Bernie Whitebear was there, and he'd just gotten back from Alcatraz. So I met Bernie Whitebear, Roberto met Bernie Whitebear in the context of struggle. And then last, but certainly, third person, the fourth person that became part of the so-called Gang of Four was Bob Santos, who in 1969, when we met him, he was executive director of St. Peter Claver, a Catholic community center. An old Catholic school had closed, and he would rent and put quotations around rent, because I don't remember any of us paying too much for rent all those years that he was there. But anyway, he allowed the Black Student Union, the Black Panther Party, and other community-based organizations like the United Construction Workers Association, all the radical Black power groups, to meet there for little or no rent money. And we couldn't get any Black churches or anybody to allow us to meet regularly, and he let us meet there. So we met, all four of us met in the context of struggle. I think that helped build solidarity amongst us when we start more regularly coming together to support each other. And we understood that by building solidarity, we got more money. When we organized MEDC, as I closed, when we organized in '81, we had this 1968 to 1980 years of experience of working together. In 1977, we started something called Making Our Votes Effective, and we threw all our work behind Charlie Royer to become mayor, and we won. All those lessons that we were learning through unity, that's power. And we didn't allow ideology or different, Roberto and I were, socialists, democratic socialists, and we believed in Marx and Lenin and all the, and the Cuban Revolution and the Nicaraguan Revolution, all that. Bob and Bernie really didn't get too much into ideology, but we always was able to work together, if you dig what I'm saying. And that led to us easily building MEDC. I think 3 or 4 days after we had MEDC, we went to United Way as an agency that we thought could start funding all of our agencies. We went together, and by 1982, United Way made a commitment to fund all 4 of us. Had more money than we ever would have gotten, Theresa knows this because she just got through working for United Way, that we would have gotten going to see them individually. So that's the background on the founding of MEDC. And I'm really happy all of you are making a commitment to continue to build solidarity. And you don't have to do it in the way that we did it or anything. I like this idea of having rest. We never thought about, we need to get away and rest ourselves. But this is the modern days, and we got to take advantage of modern thought, modern technology. You know, I still have a problem getting on the computer, but y'all got to do it all. Thank you very much for letting me start this discussion, Ms. Jackson.
Thank you, Uncle Larry. Auntie Estela, will you add to this picture? What was going on in the historical? Oh, you're on mute. Hold on one second. There you go.
I arrived in Seattle in, let's see, I think early November of 1972. I had been living in Houston, involved in social justice work in the community, protesting the war in Vietnam, working on political campaigns, registering people to vote in the barrios of Houston. And somebody gave me a flyer about a national conference that was happening in El Paso, Texas, bringing Chicanos from all over the country, Mexicanos together to look at forming an alternative political party, because the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, wasn't working for us back then. And in some ways, you know, we question whether, you know, the parties are working for us today. You know, that's still an ongoing discussion. Met Roberto and other people from Seattle, kept in contact. And Roberto sent me a clipping that Chicanos occupy the old Beacon Hill School. So come and visit. So I thought, why not? So I came to visit. I met Larry, met people from the Frank's Landing, learned about what was happening with Indian people and their rights to fish in their usual and accustomed places. And so I had not, you know, been in contact with, you know, people, Native American people, Asian people. And so that was definitely a new experience in coming, and of course, eventually visited, then came back to be a part of the El Cedro de la Raza occupation. And that's clearly where, as a young person, seeing what it meant to bring people of all races together, because the occupation of El Centro was led by Chicano Mexicanos, but was supported by communities of color. And of course, as I said earlier, right, you know, we'll never be able to pay that debt, and we wouldn't even be here today. And here we are 50 years later. And so, you know, the question deals, you know, what was happening at the time in, you know, our country in, you know, the 70s. You know, MEDC, I love that Larry gave the history of MEDC, because MEDC started in the late 60s and not in 1981. In 1981, it was formalized, but right, there was all sorts of actions that were happening together where communities of color were working together. As Larry mentioned, you know, the United Indians of All Tribe occupation, the El Centro occupation, the work of closing down construction sites for to struggle for having the African American community get some of those good family wage jobs that weren't there. So a lot of different actions happening together. But at the time, you know, in 1972, when El Centro de la Raza was occupied, Dr. King had been assassinated 4 years earlier. You know, farm workers were on the move and trying to close down, you know, having people walk off, you know, the fields in terms of trying to get better working conditions. The war in Vietnam was raging. There was, you know, struggles across the country in terms of young people protesting the war. when the nation was totally shocked when 4 students were, shot down by the military, killed at Kent State. So that was what was happening, in our nation at the time. And, again, the war in Vietnam. And we also, I guess one thing I want to say, and that, we don't talk a lot about today, is that the consciousness that was developing with communities of color, we obviously learned from each other, but we also learned from the liberation struggles that were happening in Africa and Asia and Latin America, that people were taking a stand in those countries, and they were an inspiration to us that you could make change. And so that's what we were doing. That's what was happening at the time. And for El Centro de la Raza, when you think about the people who occupied, it was English as a second language students who were the impetus of the struggle. They were ordinary people. They were people that didn't have a consciousness at the time, but their consciousness was raised in terms of interacting with other communities of color and learning that we had some of the same issues and that we needed to come together to be stronger. And what came out of that for El Centro de la Raza is something back in the day that we would call seminars. And when we first came together, when the building was awarded, we taught about the history of African Americans in this country. We taught about what was happening to Asians, what was happening to Indians, because we felt it was our responsibility to have our people learn about each other's struggle. And that those seminars still happen today, 50 years later, and they're called charlas. And that is the consciousness raising that we utilize as a tool in our organization to make sure that we are continually building multiracial unity, that we are addressing, learning about the issues that we need to take a stand on. So I'll stop there because it was supposed to be 2 minutes.
Ooh, no, that was beautiful. And I have all the chills. I love that you touched on the history, and you said one thing, Estela, that really stood out to me around the fact that these were ordinary people. These weren't folks with a developed analysis who could speak to the intersections of your analysis and my analysis and break it down. Like, these were just regular folks who were building their analysis as part of this work. And I just love that. It just speaks to the grace and the love that you all had present in order to even bring those folks together. Moving into our second question, because I think that's a beautiful bridge. How did you all cultivate? I mean, this is a very big question, right? But how did you all cultivate cross-cultural communities and solidarity in that space across generations as well, right? Because you're working, Larry, you were talking about like as a young person doing this work. And of course, there were folks younger than you and folks older than you. What did that look like across race and across generations? Can you speak to that? And I'm wondering, Richard, if you would kick us off with that question, that would be great. Oh, you're on mute.
I'd be happy to continue on. I mean, what Larry and Stella mentioned has to do with shared experiences. Those shared experiences really helps to bind, the effort. You don't have to convince somebody who has a shared experience what is right and wrong. There's a tendency for us to dismiss those experiences when we do our work. But I think when I came on board, coming onto an organization with 40 some odd members who just were very unified with regards to acknowledging that they all had very similar kinds of experiences. Low access to funding, low access to officials in terms of, being able to speak directly to people in power. doing more for less, running programs with very little funding. How we built on that coalition was to recognize what we needed, developing programs that would address it, and mutually work towards lifting each other up. And I think for some of the more well-funded organizations, some of these kinds of resources were available to them, but the coalition itself was made up of organizations that had $1 million budget to an organization that had $10,000 budget. Now, at the time, $10,000 was sufficient to run a food bank and run an outreach program. But the reality is that they didn't have the kind of resources that many of the larger organizations had. So we went about, at least in terms of trying to kind of even the playing field within our organizations, develop some programs that help do that by doing workshops on board development. We embarked on a significant effort to bring funders to organizations, networking opportunities for that to happen. One of the first things I remember attending when I first started the job was to meet some grant makers at somebody's house, unheard of. And at the time, I think and people know this as well, that we only had maybe 2 grant makers of color at that time. I think Mary Moore and later Tim Otani. That was it. The knowledge base of the private foundations, and United Way included, just wasn't there, and being able to understand what the needs of the communities were. We also tried to create opportunities for our members to gain access to the policymakers. Luckily, at the time that I started, we had a kind of a merging of goodwill. Norm Rice, first African-American mayor, was elected. We had Ron Sims in the county council, and you heard in the piece on the video, I recognized his voice. Gary Locke was the governor. We're all allies to our communities, and we were able to leverage our position to be able to assist our members to gain access and impact policy, as well as putting a lot of the members into those policymaking committees and whatever you call those things, where they help to formulate policies and service delivery and targeted services. So I don't think any of those activities detracted from the solidarity. In fact, it definitely improved. I mean, I think that, during at least the time that I was there, we had a real solid organization with everybody supporting each other. I noticed that, there was ample opportunities for many of the directors to interact with other directors and talk frankly about some of the issues that they may have in their respective organizations, and draw on the experience of some of our other members on how to resolve some of the issues that they're facing. There's mutual support with the mutual understanding.
So I want to speak to sort of the shared experience certainly was there. Each community, on the heels of civil rights, was organizing within their own communities. Asian community in particular really rallied around the international district and developed more and more energy. But the fact that joining forces with other communities of color made the impact much more powerful. But key in all this was the deep respect and trust and friendships that emerged. It was, to me, a work hard, play hard, and have each other's back kind of an environment. I mean, you know, we would join forces around work strategies, but then, you know, we would support each other, not just in the professional side, but in the personal side. And those, I think, deep connections, relationships, friendships were really, hopefully not unique, but key in how the work of MEDC really had impact. I remember Bernie saying we needed to maintain the ability to have a show of force, you know, of, you know, even if we couldn't produce hundreds of people, you know, we would have enough of a perception that we could. And it was a lot of work. So there needed to be a level of trust where one person could develop the strategy and other folks would trust that, yeah, I'm going to show up for it, even though I wasn't intimately involved in the development of that strategy, because I know the person who did it. I know their history, their experience. I respect them. I trust them. I will show up. And I think that was so key and actually reinforcing that kept people's energy going to keep that solidarity.
Jump in there, Larry.
Yeah, I'd like to add, just to read, this reinforces what Richard and Theresa have just said. In 1981, around the same time, I can't remember which came first, that we organized the MEDC. When Ronald Reagan told us we weren't going to get our funding, at least not at the level that we had already been promised, I believe that what I'm about to say is true. We might still need to do some research on it. I think that the Central Area Motivation Program was the only program in the nation that ended up getting all the funding that it had been promised in 1980 by the Community Service Administration Region 10 office. We had been promised $445,000 in funding for 81. And we got that in writing in November of 80, after the, I don't know, yeah, it was either be right around the same time or right a couple of weeks after the election. The office, this is before Ronald Reagan took over, we got a letter saying we'd get 445. So when he took office, he did something and he eliminated the Community Service Administration. And then we got a letter saying we were going to get just $46,000 for the whole year. We got a little bit, but it's supposed to be 46. And our president of the board at that time was Mike Williams, Theresa. And Mike, this is, you know, he got a doctorate in economics and he's cool and mild-mannered. But he recommended to the board of directors camp that we write BULLSHIT, because I don't use bad words, on the letter and on the check, and wanted to send the $45,000 check back, but we had to wait till the board meeting in the second week of whatever that month that was, March or April, February or March 81. So the board okayed writing a bid, and they said, we're gonna go down there and get our money. So we took 150, we organized 150 camp residents and recipients of our services. most of whom were Black, but Roberto organized about 100 Mexicans and got 2 big old buses to bring them to the demonstration. And Bob Santos got about 15, mostly elderly Chinese, to come to the demonstration. We had them tell the people coming with them that, you know, we might have to go to jail or something like that. So pretty sure you tell them that. And if they can't do that, don't come. Or if they do come, we'll figure out a way that they don't have to get arrested with us. But we're serious about this. And we took 250 people down to the regional office of the Community Service Administration, and they'd never seen anything like it. People were speaking Chinese and Spanish, or like one brother said, they down here speaking Mexican, Larry. I said, yeah, man, that's all right. But it had an impact that office staff had never seen it, that the regional director came, met with Mike Williams and I, and we came out of his office with a check that we showed all the people, and the check was for the original $446,000. I don't think that happened anywhere in the nation. And it wouldn't have happened in Seattle. It's just me and Roberto and Bob, and Bernie had gone down there. They saw us as four well-educated and articulate minorities advocating for their people, and we wouldn't have got anything. But having the masses with us, and they were Chinese, Latino, and Black, that made a difference, and we got our entire funding for 81. Thank you.
That is phenomenal.
Unity, that's solidarity and action.
Yes, those are the stories, y'all. Those are the stories. So we are going to pause just to let folks digest the richness that y'all have dropped. And when we come back, we have one more panel question that Auntie Cheryl's going to kick us off on. And I want to give y'all some time to just be together. So we're going to break out into—
What do you mean be together?
We're going to break out into breakouts. Y'all are going to stay with me.
Oh, on computer. Okay.
Yeah, on the computer, in the virtual space. Yes.
Oh, okay.
I don't have teleportation powers yet, but if I did.
Okay. Because I wanted to give Estela a hug. All right.
Oh, I think it was received.
All right.
We are going to break y'all into breakout rooms just to pair you up. And I'm going to drop in the chat a couple of questions that I want y'all to talk about. What is coming up for you as you listen? And what are you putting in your pocket to take with you today? What juicy nugget that has been shared today are you putting in your pocket to take with you? And know that more are coming. Stephanie, give me the heads up when you're ready to go.
I'm opening. Yep.
All right. Perfect. And we'll bring you back in 10 minutes. How was that, y'all? I would love to just do a quick popcorn share out. Who wants to just say a little bit of what you've discussed, what you're sharing, what you're talking about in your spaces? What are you learning?
We want to change the world in our little group. We are inspired with what the elders have done, and how do we get the younger folks even to connect back with this elder history and just take it back over again by storm, like y'all did it back in the day. So that's what we were talking about. But this has gotten us all inspired again.
Yes.
Right on. That's very good to hear.
Who else wants to share? How did it go in your breakout? What came up?
And tell them to give us their name when they're sharing.
Oh, yes, please. And please do share your
I'm
name.
sorry, that was Angela Maxey with Tiny Tots.
Okay, Angela. Good to see you.
Hi, this is Susan Brown. I'm with Kids Co. And we focused on one particular issue, which is the changing bell times for the Seattle Public Schools, and how we can't just let that be steamrolled without much greater community voice and opportunity for community to present solutions, not just the one they're presenting now.
What does bell time mean? I don't understand.
They're changing the time school starts.
Oh.
For elementary kids right now, what they're presenting is elementary students will start school at 7:30 or 9:30. depending on where you live in the city. And so then that's just wreaking havoc on the childcare needs of working families.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. A great share, Susan. Thank you. What else is coming up for folks? What are you taking with you?
Elena Perez, she, her pronouns. I was with, forgive me, Yikiola. I'm going to totally, yeah, I'm sure.
That's Yikalo.
Yikalo. We were together. And one thing we talked about is just the history is so important, telling the history, because, you know, I mentioned in the chat that I hadn't realized that there was a connection between the radical history and occupations with MEDC. And why is it that all we remember is the occupations and not MEDC? And we oftentimes will drink our own Kool-Aid, we'll create these hero stories, which are, you know, I think important to mobilize people, but then we forget about all of the infrastructure and the hard work and organizing, you know, staying together and networking that goes behind those wins. And I think we do ourselves a disservice, and we do future like organizers and activists a disservice if we pretend that it was just, you know, these like the Gang of Four went out and took over buildings and then took over the world, and that's not real. And so it's just so important to lift up that the infrastructure and support that goes behind it all.
That is a very good point you're making, because there's significant intersectionality between the October 12th occupation of the old Beacon Hill School, which became El Centro de la Raza, and the fact that Roberto was so excited about the multiracial makeup of the group that joined them the night they took over, that he said, I don't know how much thought he gave to this before we got into the building, but when we got in on the first floor, Roberto said, we're going to call this building El Centro de la Raza. And all of us that didn't know Spanish, we didn't know what that meant. He said, this is the center for all the people, not just Latino people. And it has been great that that has been the name of this institution, and that it has historically maintained its multiracial, all peoples philosophy that went into its naming and its operation. You're making a very good point, sister.
Yes, the history matters.
Yeah.
Well, to that history, I'm going to transition us into our final question for you all as panelists. What are the lessons, experiences that you want to share about yourself, about civic engagement, about nonprofit work? Cheryl, would you mind kicking us off for that question?
Sure, I would love to. One of the things we haven't really talked about is, I think, what MEDC meant to us individually. And as I said earlier, I was late to the game. It was about 2011 when I actually started to get involved with MEDC. And I worked for a large organization that had an all-white board and a pretty much all-white staff, and at many times felt very much alone in that organization. And so one of the things that MEDC meant for me, it was sanctuary, really. It was a place where I could go and be with other people of color and feel like I was with people who actually understood the work I was doing and supported the work that I was doing. Another way that MEDC actually helped me was, at the time, MEDC was actually doing what they called cultural competency training. And I think they were the first folks in Seattle to actually do that kind of training. So it was something that I could send my staff to give them a better sense of the kinds of issues that people of color were dealing with. And while they called it cultural competency, they were really doing a lot of anti-racism work and talking about institutional racism. And that was stuff that nobody else was doing at that point in time. And as a result of that sort of early contact that I had with MEDC, I went on to do quite a bit of other training around institutional racism. And my organization actually became very well known in Seattle for the anti-racism work that it was doing and continues to do. to this day. I'm currently a board member with the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond in New Orleans, which is a national organization that does anti-racism training. And that, again, is a direct result of my having gotten involved with MEDC. That's probably all I have to say at this point.
It's all full circle.
Good point.
Josephine?
Yeah, I wanted to second what Cheryl is talking about in terms of a safe space, with Black and brown folks of color, because I think that we all need to have that safe space where we can authentically be who we are. But one of the things I think lessons learned from MEDC is, being nonprofit organizations and having different, and having those certifications, we have to pay attention to our infrastructure. So, it's the accounting, it's the human resources, it's the IT stuff that we have to pay attention to, as well as the reporting to quote unquote the government. So I think it's really critical that, if we are registered with the Secretary of State, that we provide those reports on a regular basis. We pay our taxes on a regular basis, and for our government contracts, we do provide those reports to show that we are accountable and transparent.
I love that. Theresa, anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that MEDC is evidence that there's still strength in numbers, and having, being unified around that strength in numbers. And I also think one of the lessons learned or hallmarks is that, and I don't want to say that people didn't have egos. I mean, they definitely had egos, but it didn't interfere with the collective purpose. So that individuality, that it's not self-care, but self-interest, promotion, and even their own organization, which, was really requiring a lot of time and attention and building infrastructure, like Josephine was saying, in order to have a foundation and a platform to be able to go out and collaborate with other communities of color. So it's I think key that people were able to subsume their own personal or professional interest for the collective greater good. And that was the priority that was the strength of MEDC.
Yeah, you saw, Theresa, how Chata dealt with Larry Gossett when he was asking about J-Lo. She quickly got him back on point.
I love the camaraderie and the friendship, y'all. It's just like the love is so apparent. That just makes my heart warm.
I want to add something as well. In terms of a lesson learned, maybe I'm just totally old school, but this format doesn't facilitate good interaction with individuals. I mean, while we work together as a collective, it was those individual relationships that binded us. Being able to speak one-on-one, being able to step aside and have a private conversation.
Right.
Those kinds of things builds bonds, which I don't see this type of a format facilitating. And I mentioned to Josephine, I hate Zoom meetings. I just don't get the kind of reaction that I want to get when I'm communicating with somebody. So when and if pandemic ever subsides and goes away, I really would encourage the opportunity for all of you to be able to get together periodically, meet face to face, have the opportunity to interact personally. And that will go a long ways to building those relationships.
So crucial. anything else y'all want to add before we do our checkout?
Thank you, Richard. We definitely keep that in mind. As the founders, we're definitely getting together in person, but eventually we'll love to have an event for all the coalition members to get together, and you all are definitely welcome to come as well.
Yeah, thank
Just
you.
I want to make a couple of points before we end up. I think one of the things that for me as a woman who stepped up to being the executive director of El Centro in 2009 is that I learned how to lead, but also how to follow, which I think, that solidarity is involved in there. And you don't always have to be leading something to be a part of something. You can take leadership and follow others who are doing good work. And I think that's extremely important. The other thing that when you have solidarity and you're working together, and I think somebody said it earlier about, the trust and working together, but it builds a loyalty and a confidence in each other that also is important to our work. And I just want to say, I feel definitely that the struggle has changed. We're not like out there marching all the time. We're not out there occupying buildings, although that's not what the struggle is only about. And we have representation of people of color at United Way and foundations and city, county government. And our people being there has made a difference. It makes a difference to have key people in those places and getting resources into the community. And all those that are in those different bodies, definitely you're doing extremely important work for our communities.
Right on. Very good point.
Agreed. Well, audience, how y'all feeling? Let's do, somebody told me this was called the chat waterfall.
What does that mean?
I know, right? I was like, what is that? The chat waterfall is everybody get your word ready for your word for how you're feeling. So your word or your phrase for how you're feeling. And don't hit enter yet. When we say go, everybody's gonna hit enter. So get your phrase ready. I'm getting mine.
Hit what?
Your word, how you're feeling. How you
I know, but where do we write it?
In the chat. If you look, should be a little button on the bottom of your screen that says chat. If you press it,
I see it.
Okay, yep. You type your word in there, but don't hit enter yet.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so type your word, how you're feeling. And then when I say go, we're gonna do the walk. Everybody hit enter at the same time, but don't do it yet. Okay, I got my word. Y'all got your words? All right. On the count of 3, we're all gonna hit enter for the waterfall.
Okay.
1, 2, 3. Look at that. That's a chat waterfall, Uncle Larry.
Gratitude. Oh, nostalgic.
Yeah. Inspired.
I'm surprised how many people use my word. Mine was inspired too.
Inspired. Yes.
Okay.
I love it. Well, with that, I want to turn it back over to the BIPOC ED Coalition co-founders and Jody to share a little bit more about what y'all are up to.
Well, I'm so inspired and just so much gratitude to everyone. But we have to, wanted to take this opportunity since we have all of you on to also just share a little bit about some upcoming stuff. So bear with us. It's hard to follow up with all the things that have been said in this and being in this moment. It's hard for me actually to kind of focus on focus on future things, but it's just been amazing. But I did want to share a little bit about our sabbatical program because we just kicked it off in the last few days and we're super excited about it. And we have a goal of raising $1.2 million to provide sabbaticals to 20 BIPOC senior leaders across Washington. These are 3-month paid sabbaticals. And it's one to, as I talked about wellness earlier, to allow our leaders who have been working so hard for so many years to have some 3 months of some really deep rest. So it's about the individual getting rest, about not just rewarding them, but really allowing them to have some healing and renewal so they can continue this work and for themselves, for their spiritual wellness. But it's also about the organization. So it's the individual, it's the organization. During those 3 months, we're going to provide resources to build capacity so other leaders at the organization can step up. And it doesn't have to fall only on one ED. And it's about being able to create a more sustainable way of doing business at the leadership level of nonprofits. And then thirdly, it's about creating a movement around recognizing the importance of wellness and rest in our communities, with funders, among those of us who actually do the work, who never rest. I mean, Larry talked about like how he never thought about it and probably just like work, because you don't really feel like you have a choice. You don't even think about it as a choice for many of us, right, Larry? Like you just do it. But some of us, what we saw at the beginning of the pandemic and even before the pandemic, we were losing a lot of really good leaders of color to leave the sector because they just were getting so burnt out. And we don't want to lose those folks. We need those folks. We need everybody.
Right.
So it's also about a movement to recognize that those of us who do this work and do it hard and work hard deserve this, and that our communities need it. And so again, it's on the individual level, it's at the organizational level, and it's at a movement level. And that's what's kind of behind recognizing that we have been asked as a community of BIPOC leaders based on this idea of extraction. And that's a word that I've learned from my colleague, Victoria, around how we have our system just takes as much as it can from us. And so we want to turn that on its head and say, okay, we're going to keep doing this work. We don't have a choice. We want to, but we got to recognize that we need to support ourselves and each other through this work. So I want to talk about that. And we kicked it off. We're going to be taking applications for the first 10 and granting out the first 10 sabbaticals by the end of the summer. And then we're going to be working on we're currently raising the money for the second 10, which hopefully we can do in a few months after that. We don't have a date yet. So I wanted to just say the sabbatical program link is in the chat. Stephanie put it in. So if you're interested, if you're on the call and you're interested in taking it, or you want to pass it on to another leader that you know, please do. And then I want to pass it on to, I don't know, Larry, did you want to say something?
No, I'm enjoying and listening to you.
Oh, good. Okay. And then I want to pass it on to Ananda, my colleague, co-founder of BIPOC ED Coalition now, to say hello, to introduce herself, and also to share some other stuff.
Hey everyone. Sorry, I joined a little bit late, so I didn't get to do introductions at the beginning. I'm Ananda Valenzuela. I use any pronouns, and honored to be a co-founder of the BIPOC ED Coalition. I just have a couple quick things I want to say. I really want to honor everyone's time and close in a timely way. First, we have an event coming up, an advocacy event with legislators from Washington State. So we have 7 to 8 Washington State legislators who are going to be coming and really speaking to some of the themes of today. It's going to be about systems change work, but in a deeply relational way. We're not going to have the legislators talking at everyone during this time. It's going to be heavily small groups that are grouped by issues that our coalition cares about, and then grouped by geography. So really deep small group spaces where coalition members have a chance to build relationships and advocate for things that matter. So it is only for coalition members. If you're not a member, please join, sign up on our website. We'd love to have you all there. It's on May 11th. It should be quite a transformational space to keep on pushing the envelope in our advocacy world. And then just in closing, I want to send out so much gratitude, gratitude for our ASL interpreters, and gratitude for the panelists who shared such wisdom today. It was truly inspirational, as everyone shared. So thank you so much, everyone. Hope you carry this inspiring energy with you and into your week. Have a lovely rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Feel free to
Bye.
open your mics.
Bye.
Oh,
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
Larry.
Bye.
bye.
Week, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye bye.
This was
Bye.
really fun. Thank you.